Hi, welcome to Revolting News. I'm Thelma, your producer, and today we have some really revolting news for you, and we're going to discuss a very important article I found on the net. It's called Addressing the Eviction Epidemic. The reason for this is I am a rent-stabilized tenant who has lived in the same New York apartment for 37 years, and I am threatened with eviction for no particular reason other than my landlord could make more money off this unit if he got rid of me. So I have a court battle to fight, and so do a lot of people. So I want to read you this article called Addressing the Eviction Epidemic. In 2017, landlords filed 230,000 residential eviction petitions in New York City's housing court, while city marshals executed 21,000 evictions. The true number of people displaced from their homes because of eviction proceedings is somewhere in between these numbers. While we can be reasonably certain that 21,000 households experienced formal eviction, an unknown number of tenants were pressured to settle with their landlords under unfavorable terms, often staving off their inevitable eviction for just a temporary period of time. An unknown number of tenants moved out after the court issued an eviction warrant to avoid the trauma and the indignity of having a marshal show up at the door. An eviction petition kicks off a process that, for some tenants, leads to years of housing instability and uncertainty. Tenant screenings for credit and housing court history is nearly universal, and a recent eviction will exclude you from all types of housing, including affordable and public housing. As a result, tenants are pushed into precarious housing arrangements, doubling up with family or friends, or the shelter system, the dreaded shelter system. These temporary and unstable living situations exclude households from formal tenant protection and strain family relationships. It is well documented that evictions and homelessness are connected. As we wrote in Tenants on the Edge, our recent report that draws on our unheard third survey between 2000 and 2016, New York City has experienced rapid growth, about 7% in population, and the number of households over the same time period. The number of low-income households has remained fairly stable, while the number of homeless families nearly tripled. Stemming evictions is the key to lowering the city's shelter population. City and state housing policies decisions, in fact, impact the rate of evictions in New York City. Landlords use the threat of eviction as a retaliatory measure against tenants who are organizing, or to force tenants out of rent-stabilized apartments, especially in gentrifying neighborhoods. Pro-landlord provisions in the rent stabilization law, like the 20% bonus that landlords can add to the rent upon vacancy, contribute to tenant harassment in neighborhoods with rising rent. The city's Independent Budget Office analysis of 2002 and 2014 data shows the largest share of family shelter entries, 43%, were from rent-regulated apartments. That means rent-controlled and rent-stabilized. Mine is rent-stabilized. Like as a result of loophole-related rent hikes or deregulation. Strengthening rent regulations and the impact of the city's development on rents in low-income neighborhoods is the city's housing plan and neighborhood rezoning is essential to stemming evictions. The city, under pressure from tenants and homeless advocates, has taken positive steps towards mitigating evictions. This is good news. In 2017, the city launched the groundbreaking Right to Counsel (RTC) program that provides low-income tenants facing eviction in housing court with an attorney. Proceedings are heavily weighted towards landlords, who are almost universally represented by lawyers in courts. Tenants' access to attorneys balance the scale. However, I'm told that the amount of income you have must be $20,000 or below in order to get one of these free attorneys. Not many people who are living in New York City even pay that in rent. The program is being rolled out over a 5-year period and is currently active in 10 zip codes. This month, the city will expand the program, cover additional zip codes. In addition, on September 12, 2018, the Right to Counsel with Council member Levine and Gibson will introduce a bill to expand the RTC to a broad range of tenants and cases. In other words, more people are going to have access to attorneys, even with higher rents and higher incomes. Where is the greatest need? As the right to counsel continues to expand, it is important to understand where tenants face the greatest threat from preventable evictions. Below, we analyze the patterns of evictions across the city by neighborhoods, visualizing the relationship between evictions and severe rent burdens, poverty, race, gender, and rent regulation. Using 2017 eviction data, we analyzed the relationship between eviction and demographic factors on a neighborhood scale. While controlling for neighborhood poverty levels and housing types, we found 3 predictors for high eviction rates: high rates of severe rent burdens, a high share of black tenants, and a high share of Latino tenants. In other words, the most vulnerable and the poorest are the ones who are picked on the most by landlords' bullies. Evictions and severe rent burdens. Severe rent burdens, when a renter household pays more than half of their income towards rent, are a top predictor of an eviction. That means that they simply cannot pay the rent. There's a map that illustrates 2017 evictions over neighborhood shares of severely rent-burdened households. Overall, the Bronx has the highest rate of severely rent-burdened tenants in the city. Morris Heights, Bedford Park, Norwood, Hybrid are all neighborhoods where about 40% of the tenants are paying more than half of their incomes towards rent. The same neighborhoods are the epicenter of the eviction epidemic in the city, while the Bronx has the greatest share of severely rent-burdened tenants overall. Eviction and poverty. New York City's poorest renter households, they earn below the federal poverty level, bear the brunt of the city's housing crisis. 78% of the city's poor tenants are severely rent-burdened, as compared to 21% of tenants overall. Removing subsidized tenants from the equation, those that pay 1/3 of their income toward rent because they live in public or other government-assisted housing or receive a Section 8 voucher, create an even starker picture. 86% of unassisted poor tenants pay more than half their income on rent and are incredibly vulnerable to eviction as a result. This is very sad. While the Bronx has the greatest share of poor residents overall, about 1 out of 3 in Brownsville and East New York, and of 4 residents in Washington Heights and Chinatown are poor. Eviction, race, and gender. Grassroots tenants organizing groups across the country, like the Right to Counsel Coalition in New York City and City Life Vita Urbana in Boston, have identified evictions as a major contributor to instability in neighborhoods of color. This has been corroborated by sociologist Matthew Desmond's widely covered research, which makes a strong case that evictions perpetuate poverty, especially among black households, and particularly those headed by women. Our analysis of 2017 eviction data shows a relationship between neighborhoods with a high share of black or Latino renters and evictions when controlling for poverty levels. Further, according to our 2017 Unheard Third survey, the share of black respondents who have been threatened with eviction was twice as high as the share of white respondents. The map visualized 2017 evictions over 3 layers of demographic data on a neighborhood level: the share of black residents, the share of Latino residents, the share of women under federal poverty level. The prominence of Central, Northwest, and South Bronx across the map layer points to an intersectional experience of the eviction crisis. Given the relationship between race and eviction, it is not surprising that homelessness disproportionately impacts black and Latino New Yorkers, women with children in particular. 58% of the city's homeless shelter residents are black, 31% Latino, 7% are white, and less than 1% are Asian. Eviction and rent regulation. That's where I come in. Tenants living in rent-regulated apartments, that is, rent-controlled and rent-stabilized, face the threat of unjust evictions as a result of various forms of harassment by landlord. 20% vacancy bonus applied to the new rent-regulated leases and vacancy decontrol both make high tenant turnover in rent-regulated buildings profitable for landlords. Analysis of 2017 Unheard Third survey data shows in at 43% of low-income rent-regulated New Yorkers report one or more types of harassment, as compared to 36% of low-income New Yorkers residing in unregulated apartments. This could indicate that landlords of rent-regulated buildings are using harassment as a strategy to push out rent-regulated tenants. Now, what is harassment? What harassment have we endured? Lack of services, for one. Hiring homeless people to sleep in the hallways, for another. Denial of services, cutting cables, all kinds of chicanery. Entering your apartment at 8 o'clock in the morning, lying, promising to make repairs, then coming in and putting an eviction case against you. This is harassment. Stabilized tenants living in neighborhoods where property values and unregulated rents are rising, are under the greatest pressure. Well, the expansion of the right to counsel, potential impact of the right to counsel, which is being expanded. New York City was the first city in the United States to pass the right to counsel law. Since 2017, San Francisco and Newark have both introduced similar programs in response to each city's unique conditions that are fueling their eviction crisis. The San Francisco program is poised to reach further than New York City because it is not income tested. Drawing on the early successes of New York City's right to counsel, members Levine and Gibson, together with the Right to Counsel New York City Coalition, are introducing a bill that would expand New York City's program. The new bill would increase the income threshold to 400% of the federal poverty line. This would mean that you could have an income of more than $20,000 to get a lawyer. Expand the right to counsel outside the housing court to include special cases, administrative hearings for Mitchell-Lama residents, certain Supreme Court ejectment cases, and housing development fund corporations. Fund tenant organizing to connect tenants to attorneys before they arrive at court. All four neighborhoods. All right. The expansion of the right to counsel would not only protect the individual tenants, but help mitigate unjust rent increases that help push units out of stabilization. Unjust is the important word to listen to here. These evictions and threats are unjust, immoral, and inhumane. The moral of the story is, if you are threatened with eviction, you have a right to have an attorney, no matter how much money you have. And get an attorney and fight for your right to live in your apartment. Thank you. You might also, if you're interested in this, like to visit my blog, Thelma, Blitz, Knits, and Fantasy Sunglasses, and it's called The 10 Plagues of Tenant Harassment, visited by New York Slumlord on rent-regulated tenants. It's quite amusing and quite shocking, and you would also might like to see my YouTube video of the time when they cut the lights in my apartment and forced me to spend 24 days in the bitterest cold of winter with no heat and no electricity. I had to vacate the apartment at that time. I will show this to you. Okay.
10 Plagues of Tenant Harassment visited by New York Slumlord.
You can find this piece online.
Cockroaches.
If you want to see the whole thing. I've only read parts of it.
Sleeping in
and
hallways.
You can also study the maps that come along with it, like this one, Eviction and Severe Rent Burdens. I'll try to show it here. I don't know if you can see it. You can probably better see it online. Evictions and severe rent burdens. That means you have to pay more than 1/3 of your income in rent. And evictions and poverty, of course. The most evictions seem to be hitting the poorest among us. And the third map is evictions, race, and gender. And of course, as we said before, it's the black, the Latino are the most heavily hit with evictions and threats of evictions. And after that, the white, and least of all, the Asians. And this is a map that shows evictions by race and gender. And it's also women and women with children who are also threatened. In other words, the weakest among us are the most bullied. This is the map that shows evictions and rent regulation. Of course, the real problem here is that the landlords are trying to destabilize the rent-regulated apartments so they can raise the rent as much as they like and end the lease as much as they like. This is the end of tenant protection and the start of unstable living conditions and threats of eviction. So this is something that really needs to be addressed by activists, housing activists, to renew rent regulation and to stop the landlords from pushing people out of their homes for no reason. I mean, if they have no reason to evict or rent stabilize the tenant, they'll think something up. They'll get creative. They'll say, you have garbage piled from floor to ceiling and wall to wall. Or they'll pay a super to say, there's a stench coming from your apartment. They'll pay someone to say that in court. And there are all kinds of lies that they tell when there's no real reason to evict a tenant. So that's why you need attorneys to defeat these lies. And this is another map for evictions and zip codes and legal services. So I would suggest, if this is your problem too, or you're interested in this subject, or you're a housing activist, that you look for this article online. It's called, once again, Addressing the Eviction Epidemic. Good luck.
The 10 plagues of tenant harassment visited by New York slumlord on tenants. No heat, cockroaches, homeless sleeping in hallways, rodents, mice, roof leaks.
Water leaking, water moving, water goes not of its choosing. Water falls and water dropping, water has no way of stopping.
It's raining in New York, and as usual, there's water coming in through the roof of my top floor apartment. Drip, drip, drip. Chinese water torture, it's been called. Now, I've been told that water combined with electricity presents quite a fire hazard. Should sparks start flying, the entire apartment could go up in flames. What to do? What to do? Well, I called 311. I made an emergency call, hoping to get a letter of violation that would compel my landlord, Mr. Robert Chu, and his wife Catherine Chu, also known as Chu's 3Ds, to make suitable repairs. But this roof has been leaking since 1981, when I first moved into the building. When I first moved into the building, there was a bookshelf that was built into a fireplace, and I stored books there. Rain came in through the chimney and destroyed all my books.
As you can see, the water is coming from the middle of the light fixture. The water is dripping. That's the drop. And this is the light fixture in the second bedroom in the back of 354 East 78th Street. It's raining out, and once again the roof is leaking, as it has since 2005. There has been
Actually,
no
it's been
repair.
leaking since
And I'm
1981
walking
when I first
in water
moved
now
in.
as I write,
But
as I film.
I guess I have a record of it leaking in 2005
The
when I
time
wrote a
now
letter to the
is
landlord about it. That's why I picked that date.
9/29, and the date is December 6th. It's now 10:48, December 5th. I have called for the fire department to look at the water That's coming through the electric light fixture and continues to come through it. We're all covered up in plastic here. We have a plastic tablecloth. We have a plastic tarp covering half the room because there's water all over the floor, and it continues to pour from this light fixture over here, right from the center.
Here comes the fire department up the stairs.
Okay,
What's the call for?
okay, a water leak through an electric light fixture over here. Okay, wait, I'm sorry. Hello, come on in here. You
Where's
look
the
at this electric light figure, come on in. I want you to see the middle of that, the middle of the light fixture over there. There's water that's coming in, dripping through the electric light fixture over there. You see that?
All right, where's your circuit breaker?
I don't have a circuit breaker.
You have a fuse box?
Fuse box is in the cellar, and we can't get in the cellar. The landlord has locked us out of the
Put that
cellar.
away, please.
What?
Please put that away.
Oh, I'm trying to get video.
That's
You don't
fine.
want it? You don't want it? Okay.
For some reason,
Mitigating
the
emergency.
fireman did
Okay.
not want me to film, so I was hoping to document the entire experience.
Alright, stand by.
All of a sudden, without warning,
The whole building?
I was plunged into
My
darkness.
my
They cut the
refrigerator
lights
too?
and all the power on the entire building.
Yes, the whole building. You shut the whole building down. My
It was
God.
traumatic. It was very, very mean.
No, that's not necessary. I'm telling you, that is not necessary.
I'm gonna have the chief come take a look at it, and he can decide.
All right. Well, can you please put the power back on? It's
I
like I tell
cannot.
you, I've been
I
living.
cannot, because we have
I've
to
been
go
living
check.
with this
You have a
for,
flashlight?
for 8 years. No,
You should find one.
I don't have a flashlight.
You need to find one. You have any kind of flashlight?
No.
The firemen refused to let me use this
Now I have to use
flashlight.
candles, which is just
I
the
was
fire
in total
hazard.
darkness. All I could use was the infrared filter of my video camera because it's able to see in the dark.
Wait a minute. I'm gonna. I have a. I can't even find a way to.